Last night, the president's big, beautiful bill passed a key procedural vote in the Senate, but efforts to make the legislation palatable to enough Republicans to secure final passage continue, as you can see. Overnight, there are new complications. The nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that the Senate bill would cost almost $1 trillion more than the House bill. That's a preliminary estimate. But if the bill passes the Senate as it currently exists, that could jeopardize the fragile support among fiscal conservatives in the House. We begin today with Virginia Democrat Mark Warner. He is the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Good morning.
Good morning.
You've been probably sleep deprived with all of what is happening. But I want to ask you about what's going on in Capitol Hill. Republicans are going to pass this along party lines. It's expected, right? But it includes things in here that Democrats, including you, had supported, right? The no taxes on tips provision, more money for Border Patrol, expansion of the child care tax credit upwards of $2,000. Why vote against it when there are popular provisions within it? And doesn't that just allow the president to say, oh, you want to raise taxes?
You can put as much lipstick on this pig as you want. This will be a political albatross for the Republicans.
Why?
Because it takes 16 million Americans off of health care coverage with cuts to Medicaid and cuts to the Obamacare marketplace. That will move us as a nation back to the same percentage of uninsured we had before Obamacare. And it's not like these people are not going to get sick. They're going to show up at the emergency room. Rural hospitals are going to shut down. That has been evidenced across the nation. It also goes after food assistance. Are we really in such a place that we're cutting, in my state, a couple 100,000 people off of school lunches, school breakfasts? They even cut food banks. It's cruel. They have also, at the end of the day, cutting 20,000 plus clean energy jobs. Mm-hmm. And for what? This was to make sure that the highest, most wealthy Americans can get an extra tax break. And as you just saw on your chyron there, it adds $4.5 trillion to the debt. I think many of my Republican friends know they're walking the plank on this, and we'll see if those who've expressed quiet consternation will actually have the courage of their convictions.
Well, some of the Republicans are arguing, well, we have to deal with these entitlements and the work requirements and things that may lead to some of the lack of qualifications that you talk about. They're not that burdensome. It's volunteer work or part-time work. So are you overstating it?
No, it's 16 million Americans off of health care. Medicaid cuts, these numbers, they're not my numbers. They're all independent sources. And the thing that I don't think people have realized, people say, well, Medicaid, I'm not poor. I maybe buy my health insurance through the marketplace. Your rates will go up $800 or $900 a month. And that will trickle through the whole rest of the healthcare market, because if you suddenly take people out of the system, they show up at the emergency room in uncompensated care. The only way those costs get passed on is higher health insurance to all of us who have traditional coverage.
So if this is so against their own interests, why haven't you been able to peel more Republicans away?
Well, I think we'll see, even as recently as just an hour ago, some of the special Medicaid provisions for certain states, I think, were disallowed because of the so-called Byrd rule. And, it's not over till it's over. I will grant that President Trump has been able to hold his party in line in an unprecedented manner. Mm-hmm. At the other end, this bill will come back and bite them. This is going to do so much damage in terms of not only health care, food assistance, mm-hmm. The whole notion that we are moving towards cleaner energy jobs, all on the chopping block, adding $4 trillion to the debt. Tell me, at the end of the day, how that is good for America. I don't think you can make the case.
Education is another front in this fight with the president. And I want to ask you about what's happening in Virginia. We saw the University of Virginia's president, James Ryan, resign on Friday. This was extraordinary. This was a pressure campaign from the Trump administration over diversity, or so-called DEI programs. In a letter, and I want to read this, Ryan wrote that if he had tried to fight back, hundreds of employees would lose jobs, researchers would lose funding, and hundreds of students could lose financial aid or have their visas withheld. But he resigned to avoid this. Is that now the playbook for other university presidents? Walk away, don't have the fight.
This is the most outrageous action I think this crowd has taken on education. We have great public universities in Virginia. We have a very strong governance system where we have an independent board of visitors appointed by the governor. Jim Ryan had done a very good job, just completed a major capital campaign. For him to be threatened, and literally there was indication that they received a letter that if he didn't resign on a day last week by 5 o'clock, all these cuts were going to take place.
It was that explicit.
It was that explicit. This is
But that sounds
extortion.
personal. That doesn't sound specific to policy or changes.
Margaret.
Like, how does the next university president get in line and get the money?
You're shocked that personal attacks are coming out of this administration? This is, I thought the Republicans were about states' rights. I thought the Republicans were about, let's transfer more power to the states. This federal DOE and Department of Justice should get their nose out of University of Virginia. They are doing damage to our flagship university. And if they can do it here, they'll do it elsewhere. On the end of the day, I understand that with so many things at stake, that the idea, and I think Jim Ryan laid it out, that he was going to make his personal job more important than these cuts. But boy, that shouldn't have been the choice.
Well, and we know that the administration is looking at more universities, and the Assistant AG Harmeet Dillon indicated that publicly, and University of California next in the crosshairs. So we're going to be watching that carefully.
They all want to make them like Harvard. They want to take on public universities the way they have now taken on the Ivies. End of the day, this is going to hurt our universities, chase away world-class talent. And frankly, if we don't have some level of academic freedom, then what kind of country are we?
I want to ask you about your oversight role on intelligence. You were briefed on what's going on with Iran. You said you fear the American people are being given a false sense of comfort with these declarations of mission accomplished. Do you believe U.S. intelligence knows how much of a capability Iran maintains now?
I don't think we have final assessments. Let me, first of all, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Secondly, the military performed an extraordinary mission. And I think they affected a great deal of damage to Iran's facilities. But the idea that the President of the United States, with no data, 2 hours after the strike, is suddenly hitting the standard of saying total obliteration, that leads us to think that they are out of the game. And we don't know that yet. And let's just be clear. You can actually set back the major program where they were trying to create, potentially, and there'd been no decision made by the Ayatollah to actually move towards weaponization, but where they could have a weaponized system with a dozen plus missiles that are nuclear warned. But what they don't know is they didn't, and this was appropriate, I'm not criticizing the administration, they didn't go after the enriched uranium that was Esfahan at that base because it's buried so deeply.
They just hit it with tomahawks,
so
not the bunker
fact
busters.
that they can have still enriched uranium, they may have some ability to still cascade that, means they could still move forward on something that might be not delivered by a missile, but a bomb in a trunk of a car. And all I don't want is the American people, or for that matter, our allies in the region, to rely on a term that was set by the president before he had any facts.
Point taken there on the specifics of the rudimentary bomb. But coming back to what you just said, there had been no decision by the Supreme Leader to make a weapon. Secretary of State Rubio on this program last Sunday told me it was irrelevant, the answer to that question, because Iran had everything it needed to make and build a weapon. So based on what you know, was there an emergency? Was there a reason the U.S. had to act in the moment it did?
We were on the verge of what could have been a much greater war in terms of Iran and Israel spreading to the whole region. Was there the imminent emergency that would trigger? Because lots of presidents have looked at taking this action. I think that's very debatable. If at the end of the day, we end up where this peace holds and Iran doesn't strike back, hallelujah. But what we don't know, for example, is Iran going to try to hit us on cyber with this administration cutting literally half of our cybersecurity personnel in this country? So I just want to make sure that we do this in a measured way. The military did great. We have set them back. But let's not pretend that they don't have any capabilities. And the only way we can get resolution on that, Margaret, and Secretary Rubio acknowledged this in the brief, is if we have boots on the ground with inspectors.
Right.
That means we've got to go to diplomacy. If America and Iran start negotiating this week face to face, that would be good.
And we will talk to the man who directs those boots on the grounds, potentially the inspectors, later on in the program from the IAEA. Thank you very much, Senator. We're going to have to leave it there.